let's paint a mystical view of a whale underwater. Hello and welcome to Run My Arts watercolor series. And before I start the tutorial, I would like to wish a very happy New Year 2025 to all of you viewers. I will be using the Canson cold press watercolor paper 300 grams per square meter, and the size of this painting is A5. So I'll be using a candlestick as a hack in order to create the white or bright highlights on the surface of the painting. So in order to do that, I am just going to rub the candlestick onto the dry paper where I foresee the highlights. If you remember from the finished painting that I showed earlier. So I'm just randomly making the marks, mostly focus on the top left corner of the painting and gradually coming down towards half of the painting where the amount of marks that I'm going to make is going to be lesser. You can also use a masking liquid as an alternative. I just don't have remasking liquid at the moment, so I thought I'd just use a candlestick instead. So this is not a very complicated painting, and the key highlight of this painting is actually those highlights on the water surface as well as the sun rays shining through the water surface towards the underwater or the seabed. So it may be difficult to see the wax effect on the paper, but if you just tilt your paper under the light, direct light, you definitely see some shine on your paper. So these areas have become stain proof or waterproof and will remain white as you start painting on it. So once done with the candle wax step, just remove any extra debris on your paper before you start painting. So in order to have a very smooth looking underwater scenery, I've decided to use the wet on wet technique. So I'm going to pre-wet the paper with some clean water using my mop style brush. So just wet them very generously because you want this to be thoroughly wet before you start painting them with the wet paint. So I am going to kickstart painting using a lighter shade on the top of the painting, since that's where the surface of the water is and that's where the sun rays are coming from. So you would want to use a lighter shade of blue or even green. Over here I am using my Persian green mixed with a little bit of turquoise in order to achieve this light bluish green shade, and then gradually I am going to paint the bottom half with the darker shade. And for the darker shade, I have used a mix of Prussian blue with Thalo Sapphire blue. You don't have to follow my exact color palette. As long as you have the darker blue shades and lighter blue shades, you can definitely nail this painting. And over here, I am just repainting with the same darker blue shade mix as I felt it needed more of that pigment. So keep adding in the paint pigment wherever you feel should have a darker shade. And by now I am sure you would have noticed those highlights or white dots appearing as soon as I start painting. So these are the waterproof areas as a result of the candle wax stain. So the next step is to lift out some of those pigment in order to reveal that sun rays as a highlight. And I am using a clean damp brush. You want to squeeze out all those excess water from your clean brush and just drag the brush just like how I am showing over here. Just drag the brush. As you drag the brush, you are definitely lifting out those paints that are still wet, and then once lifted out, you may want to clean the bristle of that brush onto a clean paper towel. So every time you lift the pigment, do have a look at your bristle, because you don't want to restain the areas where you have lifted out the pigment. So keep checking your damp brush as you do this process. Before I move on to the next step, just a quick glance sharing with you what does my working table look like. So I don't really have a studio, it's just a small working desk in my room. So the first layer of painting has dried, and as you can see here, I have already pre-sketched the body and tail of the mystical whale. Now I understand it's not that clear on the screen, but you will roughly see the outline of the tail at least. So once your painting is dry, just pre-sketch that whale's tail mainly, and you don't have to worry too much about the body. So next I am once again going to use the candlestick to create some highlights on the whale's tail and body. So just mark it just like how I am doing right here onto some part of the tail and its body. Not too much, just a little, because since there is a sun ray coming through the underwater, there's definitely a shine seen on the whale's tail especially. So that is what I am trying to create on this painting. And as I tilt the paper, you'll be able to see a little bit of that shimmer due to the candle wax. Now it's time to paint the whale, starting off with the tail, and I'm painting this wet on dry. So please remember, I have not pre-wet the paper surface, so it's basically just wet paint onto dry paper. And the color mix that I've used is the Prussian green that I used earlier with a hint of indigo, just to darken it a bit. And as I start painting the tail of the whale, you definitely notice once again those white areas that I have created using the candle wax. So this would appear as highlights similar to the one on the water surface. And as for the body of the whale, I wouldn't worry about it right now, because we're going to do more adjustments later. So right now I am just adding in more indigo. As you can see, the color is quite dark, just to create some contrast, trying to show the darker part of the tail and the whale's body. So you can mix up, if you don't have indigo, you can mix up some of your darker blue shades as in ultramarine with a little bit of sapphire or black in order to make them appear even darker. Just softening some parts which I feel has got very hard line from the indigo shade that I applied. So I'm just using a clean damp brush to give it some light washes and soften its appearance. Alright, time for a second layer painting. Since this is just the first level, so the painting is quite light or too dull in color, I need to darken this painting further. So I am once again pre-wetting the entire painting water, but avoiding the whale painting. So once done pre-wetting, I'm just going to repaint using the same color mix that I used for the first layer of painting. And as you paint, just keep in mind not to paint over the rays that we have created earlier by lifting on the pigment. In other words, avoid painting over the sun rays effect that was created earlier. Otherwise, it will appear darker as the current blue paint would stain them. So keep painting those darker blue shades until you reach the bottom of the painting, and as I move towards the bottom, I have mixed a even darker shade, because I foresee making a darker shade towards the bottom of the underwater scenery. And since this is a mystical whale, I would like to darken the whale's body and make it look mysterious in this painting. So as you paint, try to play around with your brush strokes, especially if you notice there are some strokes or lines that are standalone. I don't know how to say this. If you don't see it blended in the painting, try to make it blend into the painting and achieve a smoother look. So once my painting was dry, I realized that I needed more paint pigment on some part of the painting. So I'm just going to re-wet some of those areas that I mentioned needed repainting. I'm going to start the same painting process. And this time, as I pre-wet the area, I am also painting over the whale's body. In the previous step, I requested you to avoid painting on the whale's body, but this time I am going to overlap the whale's body with the blue paint shade. Notice as I paint, I am also painting the whale's body, but I am also avoiding painting on the light rays that I mentioned earlier. So that leaves a part of the whale's body with the shine of the light rays. In other words, there is a strip of light on the whale's body as well. So just a note that this step also involves darkening the underwater or the lowest bottom of the painting. So as I paint, you notice that I gradually increase the darkness of the paint pigment, and I have added indigo in order to achieve this dark pigment. So in case the wet paint bleeds onto the lighter areas or the rays that we have created, don't panic. You can just relift it using the clean damp brush and reveal the lighter part once again. So I just thought of darkening the surface of the water where the highlights are. So you will see me pre-wetting that surface, top part of the painting, and dropping in some bright blue paint once again. And after applying the paint, I am just lifting out some of those wet paint using a clean dry paper towel. So that would result in some highlights as well, even though I have darkened that area. Alright, time to fine tune those light rays on the tail and body of the whale. In order to do this, I am using a smaller bristle brush. I am just going to wet it or damp the brush, and I'm going to brush it over the whale painting in order to lift out the pigment and reveal the light rays. So basically this is an attempt to lift out pigment from a dry painting. As you notice, the whale painting is already dry, so we will have to use a damp brush and just brush it over lightly on the dry painting in order to wet that area and then press it or lift it with a clean dry paper towel. As you can see here, I am just brushing it with a damp brush and then lifting it out using the paper towel. And as you lift the pigment on the whale's painting, please ensure it corresponds to the ray that comes through the sea water. As you can see, it is aligned with the light rays that was created earlier on the blue sea surface. So that alignment would ensure a much more realistic look of the light shine or rays on the whale's tail and body. Next, I am going to darken the lower part of the whale's body, which is facing the seabed, because moving towards the end of the painting, everything seems way much darker, meaning moving towards the seabed, even the whale body seemed to appear darker. So in order to do that, I am using the indigo paint to just lightly outline the shape of the whale's body, and after doing so I am using my clean damp brush to give it some light washes. Basically, as the whale moves towards the underwater of the ocean or towards the seabed, it is the lower part of its body, it can also be the top, whichever way it's facing, it is moving away from the light source, so you definitely will have to darken the bottom part of the body in order to show the darker areas or shadow. So as finishing touches, I am using some white gouache paint as usual to create extra highlights or popping highlights, and the best way to do this is by applying some white gouache paint using a smaller brush size. Some paint spatters for some random highlights or water bubbles using the same white gouache paint and a fan brush. You can use an old toothbrush as well, or any brush that has a hard bristle. And with this, the painting is complete. Time to reveal the painting by peeling off the masking tape. Notice I have some staining at the lower bottom of my painting because the masking tape was broken. So I am correcting this just using a damp paper towel. So just lightly brush or wipe it onto the paint, so that will activate the paint pigment, and just lift it out using a dry paper towel. So that would do the trick. And if there's still a little bit of staining obvious, you can just paint a white gouache paint over that stained area and it would look brand new. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, then don't forget to hit the like and share button, and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't. So thank you to all my supporters, and once again I'm wishing you all the best for the kickstart of 2025. See you in another exciting tutorial. Bye.